Baruch Hashem. Today's daf yomi is Chullin daf Samaches, and today we begin the new chapter called Behema. It's either Behema Maksha or Behema Makasha, different ways it's pronounced. The Behema Makasha Leilid, an animal that's in childbirth and it's in the middle. It's delivering a baby, and then the shlita happens. So this is the law, the din of what's called a ben pekua, and the simplest way to describe this is if when you slaughter an animal, you discover that there's a fetus inside that animal, that fetus is considered to be like it was already slaughtered, and it does not need a shlita, biblically speaking. And many dinim and halachos stem from that halacha. So let's go back to the text of our Mishnah at the beginning of Samaches Amud Aleph. One more point. Where do we learn this idea of ben pekua, that an animal that's shechted does not need the fetus inside? Because it says in the pasuk, "V'chol behema mafreses parasav shosah shata shtei prasos malas gera ba behema usa tochelo." And the rabbis read it, "Kol behema ba behema." Any animal that's inside another animal, that animal you could eat. So behema makasha leiled or behema maksha leiled, an animal that's in the process of giving birth. That's what Rashi says. B'shah shlita. V'hotzia ubar. I mean, during the time of shlita was l'chora is difficult. It could be at any time, but why does it have to be specifically during the time of shlita? Uh, um, but anyway, there's a discussion amongst that. So behema maksha leiled, an animal that's in the process of giving birth. V'hotzia ubar es yado, when the fetus sticks its foreleg out, v'chzira, and brings it back, mutter b'achila. It's allowed to be eaten. We'll see what's allowed to be eaten in a discussion on the Gemara, Machokas Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Hotzias rosho, let's say the animal sticks out its head, afal pi zero, even though it put the head back in, harezek kiyod. Then once it sticks its head out, it's like it was born already, and therefore it's not allowed to be in. The fetus is not allowed to be in. Let's say you reach into the animal and you cut from the fetus, mutar b'achila, then you could still eat that fetus after the animal is slaughtered. But but from the kidneys or the spleen or the kidneys, that even though you left it in the animal, it's not going to be allowed to be. It's not going to become permitted via the shlita. Or anything that is part of the body itself, part of the mother, that's going to be prohibited, but it's not inherently part of the body. It's going to be permitted. The Gemara is going to discuss these parts of the Mishnah, but first we start with the first line of the Mishnah. We have a discussion about that. Amar Yehuda Marav, the Aver Atmo Aser, the limb itself. So we had said if you stick the limb out and you bring it back, it's allowed to be in. Meaning to say, Rav is saying the fetus is allowed to be in, even though the fetus stuck its limb out, but it brings it back in. The fetus is allowed to be in, but the limb itself, the leg that went out, that'll be prohibited. Aser, my time, Amar Kra, it says in the pasuk, Vasar basada treifa lo tochelu, that the pasuk says the meat that was in the field, that's a treifa lo tochelu, but the field as opposed to something that's partitioned, kimin sheyatza basar chutz mechitza, so once the meat goes outside of the area where it was supposed to be, Nasar, it's going to be prohibited. So therefore, Rav says that this limb became prohibited. Gemara challenges this idea. Tanan behema maksho from our Mishnah. Behema maksho eled v'hotzia uber es yado, and the fetus stuck out its hand. V'chzira muter b'achila, and then it brings it back and it's allowed to be in. My lava aver, isn't that referring to the limb? And the limb is allowed to be in. So the question on Rav, and Rav says no, uber, it's referring to the fetus. Rav says, what are you talking about? Yeah, uber my area zero. Why if you brought it back? I feel low zero nami. Even if you didn't bring it back, even if the animal didn't bring back the leg, it's still permitted. Gemara says, no huadin alpagav zira. So he says, no, it's the same law, even though he didn't bring it back. Why? I did the kabay, meaning to say, even though he didn't bring it back, even though the fetus didn't bring its limb back, it would still be permitted. Mishnah Seifa, Hotias Rosho Alpha Pishach Zero. Since we want to do the next clause, which is if the fetus sticks out its head, even though it didn't bring it back, we're going to say that if it sticks out its head, even though it brings it back, it's like it was born and it's prohibited. So for that reason, Taninami Reisha Chzir. So therefore, it says also the first clause that if it brought it back, but really, even if it didn't bring the limb back, it would be permitted. So hold on one second. The Seifa my Kamashmuan. What's the Seifa teaching us? Says the Gemara Boker Tov. What's the Seifa? The latter clause is teaching us in the Mishnah that once an animal sticks its head out, even if it brought it back in, the fetus is not permitted with the shlita of the mother. The Stamachet from the middle of the page. But why does it need us to teach us this? Seifa my Kamashmuan. Even the Yatzarosho, Havileta, Tanino. We have a Mishnah that teaches us this in Bechoros, because the Mishnah there says, Ezu Bechoro Nachla, Ve'ena Bechoro Kohanim. What's the definition? The Mishnah there describes that there are different types of firstborns. There's something that's called a Bechor for Nachla, for inheritance, meaning your firstborn vis-a-vis the fact that you get a double portion, but you're not going to be the Bechor for the Kohanim. Mean to say, in order for to be a bechor for kohanim, that you need a pidyon ben, you need to be peter rechem. But to be a bechor l'nachla, it needs to be, Rashi says, a fetus that's capable of living. That would if the baby was born as Rahman al-San, as a miscarriage, then the next baby that comes after him will still be entitled to the double inheritance of the firstborn. Rashi going to that from Rashis Ono. I mean, it has to be a one that causes you to cry excessively, as opposed to a firstborn for Kohanim. That is pet rechem. So it's possible you could have one without the other. So it has to be the breaking of the womb. So there, the Mishnah says, what's a bechor for a nachla, for a firstborn, but not a bechor for a Kohanim? Haba achar nafelim. That if you come after a miscarriage, then the next baby will still be a firstborn for inheritance, but not for pidyon ben. And so aval pisha yata rosh ochai, even if even though the baby went out alive, the head went out alive, but since he was so premature, therefore it's not going to be considered. The next one will still be the bechor for nachla. Oh, ben test or sheyatza rosh mace, or even if it was 9 months, and the baby went out dead, the next baby is still going to be the bechor for inheritance. So the Gemara says, what's the inference? Time of the rosh mace. So it was a 9-month-old whose head went out when he was dead, harosh chai. But wouldn't the implication be that if the head was alive when the head exited the womb, haba acharav bechor l'nachla, that would be enough to tell us that that the one who comes after would no longer be the firstborn for inheritance. So we see from here that this is the indication that the controlling factor is bechor l'nachla, is the head coming out of the body. So why do we say that that's what our Mishnah is teaching us here? The Gemara says, and if you want to say, well, one Mishnah teaches us about a human and the other one teaches us about an animal, the adami behema will yolef, because we can't learn out a human being from an animal. Means they're two separate teachings. What do you need, Jeff? No, they're the same book? Oh, you mean that they gave us a bad edition? Okay.
It's not bad. It's just paper is it's not now something glossy finish.
I got you. Okay. But I'm saying the two books are both the same. No, you switched it out. No, I'm saying you switched that book with that book, but they're the exact same, right? Okay, fine. I got you. All right. Now I know. I didn't even know how your brain worked, but now I have an inkling. Okay, so the truth is, you're just a little bit off and messes everything off. So it's right. You got to get it all right. So you're not distracted. So the Gemara says, and if you want to say we need both teachings to tell us that when the head comes out, that's when the baby's born, because he couldn't learn out a human being from an animal. So, and if you would have said, well, teach us by a human and then I'll learn from an animal, the adam mi behema or yoav, because a human being from an animal, we can't learn. Why? We can't learn out a human being from an animal because, hold on one second. Hold on. And the reason why we can't learn out a human being from an animal is because the because an animal, there's no like birth canal, meaning to say that the animal, when an animal gives birth, it's much more open than when a woman gives birth. And you also can't learn out the law of the head being considered the birth from animal from a human being, the chashav pertzufa, panam didei, because a human being has a chosh of a face. His face is unique. It's special. It's the face of a human being. You can't learn that out from an animal. Well, haname tanina. But we also learned. We have another Mishnah that tells us this law that once the head is born, it's going to be considered like the animal is born, and this is going to be later on in Daf Ayin Zayin. That what is considered shilya, which is the amniotic sac, which the fetus is contained in. Sheyatsta mikza. So if portion of the amniotic sac exited the body, asura b'achila, kisiman vlad b'isha. So once the amniotic sac exits the body, then we're going to say that that's going to be that amniotic sac and the fetus in it is prohibited to be eaten, like it's a sign of a fetus in a woman. So too, it's like a sign of a fetus in an animal. So meaning to say, and the concern is that the head is in there. Now, so if you want to say that when our Mishnah says when it says in the first clause that specifically Hechzero Dereisha Dafka, when it says that he put the animal when he brought the limb back in, that's saying that Dafka, that the limb itself is permitted. So therefore, Tana Seifa to Reisha. That's why the last clause in our Mishnah also says Hechzero, just because it also said it in the first clause. Eli Amar Slow Dereisha Dafka Vo the Seifka Dafka. But if you want to say that neither clause is specific, that meaning to say that you don't really need it in either case. We don't need it in the first case because in the first part of the Mishnah, because we know that the fetus is permitted, whether or not it brought its limb back in, and we don't need it in the Seifa because we already know the law that once the head goes out, then the fetus is like it's born. And this is learned out from the Mishnah on Ayin Zayin. If that's the case, if neither one is needed, why do we have it both? So the Gemara then goes back to this idea. What is our Mishnah saying? The Gemara says, again, Rav's position was, our Mishnah had stated that an animal that was in childbirth, and then you slaughter that animal, and it had stuck its hand out in the middle of the childbirth and then brought it back in. It said in the Mishnah that it's permitted, and Rav said the fetus is permitted, but that limb that went out is prohibited. So the Gemara is saying, yes, or Olam Uber, our Mishnah is not necessarily support for Rav, who our Mishnah is saying that like Rav. It could still be like Rav. It's saying the fetus is permitted, but not the limb. So what's our Mishnah needed for? If anyways, we would already know, even if it didn't stick its limb back in, it's permitted. What's the Mishnah telling us when it says it's permitted? So the Gemara is saying, Olama Uber, it's referring to the fetus, but it's teaching us a chedesh. Or nitzracha or makom chatak. Like Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak taught in a slightly different context, the place of the cut. And achinami or nitzracha or makom chatak. So basically, if the animal stuck its leg out and then it brought it back in, then the area on the border where the birth canal, where the opening of the birth canal was, that area which was flush with the birth canal, that area, if it stuck its limb back in, that area will be permitted. But if it didn't stick its limb back in, that area on the border of the birthing canal, that or the opening of the womb, whatever that exact place is called, that area will be prohibited if it didn't stick its limb back in. But if it stuck its limb back in, that part of the fetus will be permitted. And that's the chiddush of our mission when it says it's allowed. So the Gemara says, again, we're going to challenge this law of Rav, who says that the limb itself, even if once it goes out, even if it goes back in, it's going to be prohibited. Tashma behema makshaleled. Let's say meaning say it's prohibited. We haven't addressed the question according to Rav. Let's say you slaughter the fetus. You don't need to slaughter the fetus, but let's say you slaughter that fetus. If that limb will be permitted. But right now we're assuming that limb is prohibited regardless. Tashma. So again, another attempt from a brisa, but it says behema hamakshale. The animal's giving birth, and hotzi uberas yado. It stuck its limb out. Ve'chsira, and then it brought it back in. Achach shacharas imo. And then you slaughter the mother. Mutar b'achila. You can eat the fetus. Shacharas imo v'achar kachachsira. Let's say you slaughtered the mother, and then it brought its limb back in. Aser b'achila. So then you can eat it. So the implication clearly is that then you can't eat the limb, but if it brought its limb back in before the mother was slaughtered, you can eat it. And this is not like Rav. Let's say you stuck out and the second part of the price will deal with later. Let's say it stuck out its hand, and you cut it off. And then afterwards you slaughtered the mother, everything that's outside tamei is considered Aver Menachayim, it's tamei, v'asar, v'shebifnim, and whatever's inside is tahor or mutar. Now become permitted with the slaughter of the mother. Shacharas imo v'achka chotcha abba. So let's say you slaughter the mother, and then afterwards, only after you slaughter the mother, you then cut the meat. Shacharas imo v'achka chotcha abasar. Then maga nevela. Then when you touch it, it's like a carcass. This is divrei meir. Maga treifa shluta. Hey, we'll deal with that part later on Daf Ayin Beis, but the Gemara then says we fear from a proof against Rav. Katani Mia Reisha was the first cause. Say Hotzi Uber as Yado. If it stuck out its hand, Vichzira, and it brought it back in. V'ach kach shachat efimo, and then you slaughter the mother. Mutar b'achila. Then you could eat it. My love, isn't this referring to the aver that you can eat the limb, even though it went out and it goes back in? You could eat the limb with the slaughter of the mother. Where it says no uber, no, that's referring to the fetus. Uber, but you can't say it's referring to the fetus. Amos say, but the next clause says shacharas imo. That if you slaughter the mother v'ach kachach zero and then it brought it back in aser b'achila, then it's prohibited. V'ya uber. And if you say it's referring to the fetus, amai aser, it's the opening law of our chapter that the ben pakua, the baby that's the fetus that's inside the mother, is permitted with the slaughter of the mother. Not that it's prohibited, so it must be referring to the limb. Mara says no. We give the same answer. Well, we're not talking about the fetus or the limb here. We're talking about the area, the makom chatach, makom chatach. We're talking about to that area on the margins, that area on the border. So the Gemara says, Aini, is this really the case? Is this really the case? Is this really the case? Again, we're going to challenge Rav from another brisa. When Avimi came from Bechuzai, he brought a brisa, and the brisa taught the following. It says in the pasuk, their pasuk talks about the thimonim of a kosher animal. It says parsa. It has any animal that has a split hoof. So what did we learn from the pasuk that says parsa? Hechsir, that if it brought its split hoof back in, echol parsos. But then it also says in that pasuk, shtei prasos, and we learn from that part of the pasuk, hechsir echol. What it brought, if it brought its 2 feet back in, you could eat it. My love, hechsir prasa echol, echol prasa, lo hechsir prasa echol uber. Doesn't this mean that if it brought its foot back in, you could eat the foot, not like Rav, but if it didn't bring it back in, you could just eat the rest of the fetus. So isn't that what it's referring to? Gemara says, E uber. The Gemara says, if you're saying, the Gemara says, that's not what it's teaching us. It's my love, hechsir prasa echol parsa. Isn't it teaching us that if it brought the foot back in, you could eat the parsa? The Gemara says saying no. Well, hechsir prasa echol iber. No, it's saying that if it brought the foot back in, you could eat the uber. The Gemara says uber. If it's telling us you could eat the fetus, my area hechsir. I feel low hechsir nami. Even if it didn't bring the foot back in, you could eat it. So the Gemara gives the same answer. Again, we're just doing it to teach us about this place on the margins. Gemara says, but what are you talking about? But this brisa is citing 2 words from it. It's citing 2 learnings out from this pasuk. It's 2 teachings. So one of them, okay, will be for the place on the margins, but the other one is to teach us the limb. Gemara says no. One is teaching us the law of the place of the margins. And the other is teaching us a separate law. Para. Now let's say there's a ben pakua, the meaning to say you slaughtered the mother, and the fetus inside you found doesn't have split hooves. It has the feet like a camel. It has kohet. It has webbed feet. Aliba to Rabbi Shimon. Now, and this goes even according to the position of Rabbi Shimon. The Amar Rabbi Shimon kohet ben para aser, because this is a machlokes that we're going to see later on. That Rabbi Shimon is on the position. Let's say a cow gives birth to a camel. Excuse me. Now Rabbi Shimon says, let's say a cow gives birth to a camel. Then Rabbi Shimon says it's prohibited. But we learn from our pasuk, when does Rabbi Shimon say it's prohibited? That's where the camel was born from the cow. But if this camel was still inside the mother, then it will be shari, and then it will be permitted because of the law of ben pakua. And we learned this out from this pasuk. I actually, last time we did this Gemara, I looked into it. Right now, we don't have the technology to take a pig fetus and stick it in a cow and be able to carry it. But you can imagine that you could have a way in which it would be permitted. You could take the pig fetus, stick the pig fetus inside the. I'm just speaking. Yeah, it's not obviously halachic. You could take a pig and pig egg, stick it in the cow, slaughter the cow, and then the pig might be permitted according to this. Anyway, we'll ignore that for now. So we see from here that Rav said that when our Mishnah says if it sticks out a leg and brings it back in and they slaughter the mother, it's permitted. That's not referring to the leg itself, but just referring to the rest of the fetus. Gemara cites the position of Ula Amar Rabbi Yochanan. He argues with Rav. He says Ve'ever Atzma Mutter. He says the limb itself will be permitted. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Ula Rabbi Shmuel Amar Travayo Ever Atzma Answer. How can you say it's permitted? We have both Rav and Shmuel who say it's prohibited. Amar Lei. Ula says, I love Rav and Shmuel. Man Yadlon may offer the Rav and Shmuel Malina Neinayin. He says, if you would only bring me some dirt from their graves, I would fill up my eyes with it. Elahachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said explicitly, everything is included in verse. The meat of the treifa you cannot eat. But the Torah then said, since it started off as a general rule that you can't eat the meat in the field, and we already said the field refers to a mechitza, there's no partition. That means you can't eat any meat that's gone out of its partition. But when the Torah then said this specifically about a chatos, we say from here, chatos or kachim in general. Keep past those box of tissues, Jeff. Thanks. Chatos, thank you. Gemara said, hold on one second. Hold on one second. So since the Gemara specified it by kachim, chatasu to par rachmanah. Kachim is what the Torah specified. Of a kol mili, but everything else, even the hadar, once it goes back in, shari. So therefore, since this limb went back in, it's permitted. So the Gemara challenges Rabbi Yochanan because we learned in the Brayso of Meisvei Basar Basada Treifa Lo Tochelu. What do we learn from the fact that it says meat in the field that's a treifa you cannot eat? Matam Olamar Fisham Matzinu Ma'aser Sheni Ubikurim. We know by Ma'aser Sheni and Bikurim Sha'afa Pisha Yatzu Chutz L'Mechitzasan. You need to eat that in Yerushalayim. Let's say you took it to Yerushalayim, then it went out, the Chazru, and then it goes back into Yerushalayim, Mutarin. Then they're allowed to be in Yachol Av Dekain. So I might think that also with respect to the fetus, that the law is that it will be permitted once it goes back in. Tamom or Treifa. So the pasuk says it's not kosher. My Talmuda, Amarabaka Treifa, Ma Treifa, and this is a very important point with respect to halacha, so that the post can discuss this in depth. But just like a treifa, kibun shenutrafa shuvein lahet, or once an animal becomes treifa, you can't make it kosher again. Excuse me. Pasar. So to meat, kibun sheyatza chutz l'mechitza. So once the meat has gone outside of its mechitza, i.e., once the limb has gone out of the mother, shuvein loheter, it's no longer going to be allowed through the slaughter of the mother, and so therefore this is a tiyupta, tiyupta. The law is like Rav that the limb will be prohibited. It's a refutation of Rabbi Yochanan's statement. Amar Mar. So we just finish this part of the daf. Amar Mar lefisha matzinu b'ma'aser sheni and bikurim. Where do we know this law by ma'aser sheni and bikurim? Now, once it goes out, if it goes back into Yerushalayim, it's allowed to eat because it says, hey, so the Gemara asked this question, hey, where do we find it? You're not allowed to eat the Ma'aser Sheni in your gate. In your gates, you cannot eat it. But if it went outside your mechitza, and then it goes back in, mutar, and then you're allowed to eat it. The Marava, in Eretz Yisrael, they had a different discussion of this whole inyan. Rav Amar Yesh Leidole Varim, Rabbi Yochanan Amar and Leidole Varim. I'm just saying the first sentence here, but it's a different take on the discussion. The question is whether the limb is considered to be born. Whether the limb is considered to be born. There's a very lumdish conceptual concept here. That Rav says the limb is born, and Rabbi Yochanan says the limb is not born. My benaya, what's the distinction? Ika benaya l'meiser miut aver shebefnim. Do we say that if there's a minority of that limb that's still inside? Well, if the majority of the limb was born, then that we're going to say that the rest of the limb inside will also be prohibited. Meaning, not only will the limb that's outside be prohibited, but even the minority that's inside. And this is a slightly different discussion, so we'll take that up on tomorrow's daf. Baruch Hashem, we start the famous chapter called Bema Hamakasha Lele. Thank you.